The desert was alive with fire. Horses thundered across the canyon floor, their hooves striking sparks from the stones as shouts echoed into the night. The raid had come without warning. One moment, the small frontier camp was quiet beneath the stars, the next it was swallowed by chaos. Tents tore open like paper in the wind, flames leapt to the sky, and men shouted as arrows hissed through the dark. She had been running. That was all she remembered at first, the pounding in her chest, her skirts catching on brush, the smoke filling her lungs. Behind her, the camp collapsed into ruin. Ahead of her, the desert stretched wide and merciless. Then he appeared. The warrior on horseback cut through the smoke like something pulled from the earth itself, paint streaked across his face, braids whipping in the wind, eyes sharp as obsidian. His horse skidded to a halt in front of her, blocking her escape. She stumbled back, heart slamming against her ribs. "Go!" She tried to shout, her voice breaking, but her words vanished in the roar of the raid. He didn't speak. He leaned down, one hand gripping the reins, the other reaching toward her with a swiftness that left her frozen. His fingers caught her arm before she could twist away. She struck at him, nails catching skin, but he didn't flinch. With a single motion, he pulled her up and over the saddle. The world tilted. The ground spun below her as she was hauled against the hard leather, the heat of his chest at her back. She screamed, but the desert swallowed the sound. The horse lunged forward, carrying them both into the night. For long, breathless moments, she fought. Her fists pounded against him, but his arm locked around her waist was iron. She tried to bite, to claw, to twist away, but it was useless. He didn't strike her back, didn't curse or snarl. He simply held her fast, his focus on the horizon. The fires of the camp grew smaller, distant, until only the stars remained. The night air cooled her burning skin. Slowly, her struggles weakened, replaced by the throb of exhaustion and fear. She slumped, trembling, against the warrior's chest. His heart beat steadily beneath her ear. She hated the calmness of it. As if none of this, her terror, her life torn away in moments, was anything to him at all. He was not breathing hard, not sweating as she was. He rode like a man born from the desert, one with the horse, one with the night. At last, he slowed. The horse came to a stop near the edge of a rocky outcrop where the shadows ran deep. He dismounted first, then reached up, catching her by the waist. She recoiled, but his grip only tightened, and he lowered her to the ground as if she weighed nothing. For a heartbeat, she stood there, glaring up at him. His face was unreadable in the moonlight, features sharp, eyes dark and endless. "What do you want from me?" she demanded, her voice breaking. He said nothing. Instead, he turned his head slightly, listening to the distant sounds of the raid fading into silence. Then he looked back at her, tilting his chin as though studying her with curiosity more than cruelty. She felt the weight of his gaze like fire on her skin. She wanted to scream again, to claw at him, but some instinct warned her. It would be useless. He was stronger, faster, and yet he had not hurt her, not beyond dragging her away. Finally, he spoke a single word, low and rough, a name that meant nothing to her. Taza, her breath caught. She didn't know what it meant, his name, perhaps, but the sound of it seemed to hang between them, heavy as the desert heat. He turned away then, leading the horse deeper into the rocks. She hesitated only a moment before following, for the night stretched wide and empty, and she knew she could not survive it alone. She was his captive now. And though her heart screamed to hate him, some quiet part of her, against all reason, was already listening for that name in her mind. Taza. The desert by night was not silent. Crickets sang in the brush, owls cried from hidden perches, and the steady rhythm of the horse's hooves carried them deeper into land she had never seen. The captive woman clung to the saddle horn, too weary to resist, too proud to beg. Every muscle ached from the struggle of before, but she would not let him see her break. Her captor, Taza. The name still echoed in her mind, strange and foreign on her tongue. He hadn't offered it as kindness, not even explanation. It had been a statement, almost a warning. This is who I am, and she had no name here. Only a captive dragged into a world she didn't understand. At dawn, the canyon opened into a wide valley. Red cliffs rose on either side, glowing like embers in the morning light. Taza guided the horse with ease, his posture tall and unyielding, the braided strands of his dark hair brushing his shoulders. She stole glances at him when she thought he would not notice. At the paint smeared across his cheekbones, the scar that cut along his jaw, the way his eyes scanned every horizon like a hawk searching for prey. He looked carved from the desert itself, and she hated the thought that some part of her found him fascinating. When they stopped, it was by a stream hidden beneath cottonwood trees. Taza dismounted and gestured for her to follow. She hesitated, stubbornness stiffening her spine, but the thirst in her throat burned too sharply. She slid down, landing unsteadily on the earth. The moment her feet touched the ground, she considered running. But then he turned. His gaze caught hers, sharp and warning, as if he already knew what thought flickered in her mind. Slowly, he crouched by the water, filled a wooden flask, and drank. Then, without speaking, he held it out to her. Her lips parted in defiance. She didn't want his water, his help, anything that bound her further to him. Yet her throat screamed otherwise. With shaking hands, she took it, drinking until the coolness soothed the fire inside her. When she dared glance up, he was still watching her, not cruelly, not kindly, simply watching. She shoved the flask back at him. "I don't need you." His brow lifted slightly, though he gave no reply. He tied the flask back to his horse's saddle, then motioned for her to walk. She obeyed because there was no choice. Hours stretched into a haze of heat and dust. By midday, they reached a ridge overlooking a distant cluster of shapes. Hides stretched over poles, smoke curling from fires, horses grazing nearby. An Apache camp. Her heart lurched. This was not just about him. She was stepping into an entire world that had no place for her. When they entered, every head turned. Women paused in their grinding of corn, children froze in play, men rose from the fire with narrowed eyes. She felt their stares pierce through her, suspicion and hostility written clear across their faces. A man older than Taza stepped forward, his chest broad, hair streaked with gray. He barked something sharp in their tongue, his eyes on her. Taza responded, voice firm but even, his tone carrying the weight of command. She could not understand the words, but she understood the reaction. The older man's frown deepened, yet he stepped back, conceding. Taza moved past him and led her toward a small space near the edge of the camp. He motioned for her to sit by the shade of a brush shelter. When she resisted, he finally looked at her, really looked. His voice was low, deliberate, as if testing how the sounds would land on her. "Stay," one word, simple, clear. Her chest tightened. She wanted to spit back, to defy him, but something in his voice wasn't just command, it was protection. He wasn't asking, he wasn't threatening, he was promising. She sank onto the ground, folding her arms tight across her chest. He gave a single nod, then turned away, his silhouette cutting against the red cliffs. For the first time since the night of fire, she realized she was no longer afraid of dying. No, her fear was changing, and that was far more dangerous. The camp was alive in ways she had never known. Smoke rose in thin spirals from cooking fires, the scent of roasted corn and venison mixing with dust and sagebrush. Children darted between shelters made of hides and brush, their laughter sharp as sparrows, while women bent over grinding stones, their hands moving with steady rhythm. Horses snorted in the distance, tethered to posts near the edge of the valley. And then there was her. Every gaze that slid over her was sharpened by suspicion. Women whispered behind their hands. Children peeked at her with wide eyes before being pulled away by mothers. The men, tall and hard as the cliffs around them, narrowed their eyes whenever she shifted too close to their circles of fire. She sat in the shade of the shelter where Taza had placed her, arms wrapped around her knees, pretending the stairs didn't burn her skin. Her heart beat fast, though she kept her chin lifted, refusing to fold in on herself. Captive, yes. But she would not let them see fear. Taza returned at intervals, sometimes with water, sometimes with food he gestured for her to take. He didn't speak more than a word or two, but she felt the shield of his presence. Whenever another man drew too near, Taza's gaze hardened, and they stepped back without a fight. It became clear, she was alive only because of him. That thought unsettled her more than the hostility of the others. Why would he protect her? He had dragged her from fire and ruin, yes, but surely not out of mercy. She had heard enough whispers, enough stories. Captives weren't kept out of kindness. By the second day, she was given small tasks. A woman pushed a basket of corn toward her, motioning for her to help strip the husks. Her hands fumbled at first, the leaves cutting her skin, but she forced herself through the work. She would not give them more reason to despise her. The woman's eyes softened slightly at her effort, though the warmth did not last long. Suspicion clung to every interaction like a shadow. That night, she witnessed the heartbeat of their world. As the sun sank, the tribe gathered around the largest fire in the center of camp. Drums began, low and steady, joined by voices rising in song. The sound wasn't like anything she had ever heard. It wasn't words she knew, but it carried something deeper, a power that shook her chest and pulled her close to the flames. Dancers moved in circles, feathers and beads catching the firelight, faces painted with bold lines of red and black. Children clapped in rhythm, women's voices soared, and the men stamped the earth like thunder. It was beautiful. Terrifying but beautiful, and through the shifting glow of flame, she saw him. Taza stood at the edge of the dancers, tall, still, a spear resting against his shoulder. The firelight painted his features in gold and shadow, his eyes never leaving hers. She shivered. It should have been hatred she felt. He had stolen her from her life, torn her from everything she had known. Yet when he looked at her like that, like she wasn't just a stranger in their world, but something more, her breath caught. Later, when the fire burned low and the camp drifted into sleep, she lay awake in her shelter, listening to the murmurs of the desert wind. She thought of escape. She thought of her family, of what had been lost. But her thoughts kept circling back to the warrior's gaze, steady and unyielding, holding her in place even when he was far away. The camp was a world of strangers, but he was not a stranger anymore. And that truth frightened her most of all. Dawn crept soft and gold across the cliffs, washing the camp in muted light. Smoke curled from smoldering fires, horses snorted awake, and voices stirred in the distance. She rose stiffly from the ground, brushing dust from her torn skirts, her body aching from the hard sleep. Her eyes found him immediately. Taza. He stood apart, near the horses, his silhouette long and sharp against the rising sun. He moved with quiet authority, his hands sure as he checked the tack and braided leather reins. Every motion was precise, efficient, without waste. She hated how her gaze lingered on him, how a strange gravity always pulled her eyes back. It wasn't only her that noticed. When she carried water from the stream, when she bent over a basket of grinding stones, she felt the eyes of the camp prick her skin. Whispers trailed behind her, sharper than knives. She didn't understand the words, but she didn't need to. The meaning was in the tone. She didn't belong. By midday, the heat pressed down like a heavy hand. She wiped sweat from her brow, trying to ignore the gnawing hunger in her belly. Taza appeared suddenly, holding a strip of dried meat and a handful of berries in a small woven pouch. He offered them without a word. Her pride surged hot. She wanted to refuse, to throw the food back at him, but the ache in her stomach betrayed her. She took it with stiff fingers, chewing as if the act itself were a humiliation. Still, she noticed, he never watched her with cruelty. Not once. When others came too close, when a boy lobbed a stone near her feet, when a man muttered something sharp while passing, Taza was there. Silent, his mere presence enough to turn them away, and so the whispers changed. They weren't just about her. They were about him. That night, she heard it. Two women speaking near the fire, their voices carrying in the still air. She didn't know the words, but she understood the sharp glances, the way their eyes flicked from her to where Taza sat sharpening his blade. His head was bowed, his hair falling forward, but she felt the tension ripple through him. He heard them too. Her chest tightened. What did it mean, this protection? Was it duty, defiance, something else she couldn't name? Later, as the camp settled into sleep, she crept outside the small shelter, unable to bear the closeness of the walls. The desert night spread endless and vast, stars spilling like silver dust across the sky. For the first time since her capture, she let herself cry, silent tears streaking down her face, swallowed by the wind. A shift of shadow broke her solitude. He was there, standing a few paces away, watching. She startled, wiping at her face, ashamed to be seen so raw, but he didn't move closer, didn't speak. He only stood as if keeping guard, his spear glinting faintly in the starlight. For a long time, neither moved. The desert sang its endless song around them. Finally, her voice cracked through the stillness, small and unsteady. "Why me?" His head tilted, the question passing between them like smoke. His gaze softened, though he gave no answer. He didn't need to. She felt it in the silence, the weight of something unspoken, something she wasn't ready to understand. And so, though she wanted to hate him, though she wanted to see only her captor, she found herself lying awake until dawn, listening for his footsteps just beyond the shelter. The warrior had taken her. Yes. But somewhere deep inside, she feared something far more dangerous, that he was beginning to keep her. By the third day, the whispers had sharpened into words she didn't need to understand to feel their sting. She could sense it in the way the women's eyes lingered longer, the way children were pulled sharply away when they strayed too close. Most of all, she could sense it in the men. Their glances toward her weren't merely suspicion anymore, they were resentment. And at the center of that resentment stood Taza. He returned from a hunt that morning, a deer slung over his shoulders, his steps steady even under the weight. She watched as he laid the animal at the center fire. Men rose to meet him, their faces unreadable, their voices low but sharp. One man stepped forward. Younger than Taza, broader in build, his chest bare and painted, eyes flashing with hostility. He barked words in their language, his hand cutting the air in a gesture that pointed directly at her. Her blood ran cold. Taza's head lifted, his gaze hard as stone. He responded, his voice firm even, but there was iron beneath it. The young man sneered, stepping closer until they stood almost chest to chest. The camp stilled, silence falling heavy as every eye turned to them. She didn't know the words, but she knew a challenge when she saw one. The young man's hand went to his knife. Her breath caught. She surged to her feet before she could stop herself, her heart pounding. "Stop!" The word was useless, neither man spared her a glance. In a flash, the knife was drawn. The young man lunged. Taza moved faster. His spear butt struck the attacker's wrist, the blade clattering to the dirt. Gasps rose from the circle as Taza pressed the tip of his spear to the man's throat, his stance unyielding, his face unreadable. The younger man froze, his chest heaving. For a long, charged moment, the desert itself seemed to hold its breath. Then, with slow precision, Taza lowered the spear. He stepped back, his dark eyes never leaving the man's face. A warning. A command. A promise. The man retrieved his knife, shame burning his features, and shoved past the onlookers before disappearing into the crowd. Only when the circle dissolved, when the murmurs scattered into the air like smoke, did she breathe again. Her knees trembled so badly she sank back to the ground, clutching her skirts tight in her fists. Taza turned toward her then. His gaze lingered, not cold, not cruel, but heavy with something she could not name. He didn't come closer. He didn't need to. The message was clear. He had chosen to protect her. Not just once, not just in the raid, but here, now, in front of them all, and the tribe would not forget it. That night, she lay awake beneath the brush shelter, the fire's glow flickering across the camp. She thought of the young man's fury, of the knife flashing in the sun, of Taza's spear steady and sure. She should have felt relief. She should have felt safe. Instead, she felt something far more dangerous, an ache in her chest, fierce and unwanted. Because for the first time, she realized, his fight was no longer about duty. It was about her. The air in the camp felt heavier after the fight. No one said it outright, but she felt the shift. Men glanced at her like she was a curse brought into their midst. Women drew their children closer when she passed. Even the children who used to peek at her with curiosity now stared only from a distance, their eyes hard instead of wide. And all of it pointed back to him. Taza. The warrior who should have let her fall, should have let the challenge cut her fate from the tribe's hands. Instead, he had stepped into fire for her, again. By the next evening, she could no longer breathe beneath the stairs. She slipped away from the shelter, following the trail of dust toward the cliffs, her skirts catching on the brush. The desert stretched wide and merciless under the dying sun, glowing red as embers. She thought maybe she could vanish into it. Maybe she could find the courage to run, but the moment she reached the ridge, she heard him. Tasha, her name, broken, uncertain on his tongue, but her name nonetheless. She froze, her breath catching. Slowly, she turned. He stood a few paces behind her, his chest rising steady, his hair unbound and spilling over his shoulders. Without paint, without the hardness of battle, he looked different, younger. But his eyes, those dark, endless eyes, held the same fire that had first captured her. "I can't stay here," she whispered, the words slipping from her lips before she could stop them. "They hate me, I see it. I feel it." For a long moment, he said nothing. He only studied her, as though measuring the weight of her words against the silence of the canyon. Then, with careful precision, he spoke. "Not all." The sound of his voice startled her. Not just the rough edges of his accent, but the fact that he was trying. She blinked at him, waiting, hungry for more. He stepped closer, slow as if approaching a frightened deer. "Hate some, not all." Her throat tightened. "And you? Do you hate me?" His brow furrowed, the question clearly one he had never been asked in such directness. His lips parted, then closed, searching for words that did not belong to his tongue. At last, he shook his head. "No." The single syllable landed heavier than a speech. "No," she echoed, her voice trembling. "Then why protect me? Why risk yourself for me?" His gaze flicked away, toward the fading horizon, then back to her. He took another step closer, until the space between them was thin as a breath. "You fight," he said finally. His hand lifted, hovering near her shoulder but not touching, as if the memory of her struggling against him in that night of fire lingered in his skin. "Strong, not weak, not," he searched for the word, his jaw tightening. "Not broken." Her chest burned. She wanted to deny it, to throw his words back at him, but something inside her ached at the recognition. "And that's it," she whispered. "That's why you keep me alive?" His eyes softened, though his face remained carved from stone. He leaned closer, the desert wind stirring the braids at his shoulders. "Alive because mine now." The words hit like a blow. She staggered back a step, her pulse roaring in her ears. "Yours," she hissed. "I'm not yours, I'm not anyone." His head tilted, the faintest crease of confusion in his brow. "Not chain," he said, his voice low, almost urgent. "Not cage, choice." Her breath stilled. For the first time, she saw something shift in his gaze, not command, not defiance, but a plea. A silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. She stared at him, at the warrior who had torn her from her world, and yet shielded her within his own, at the man who had no right to speak of choice when he had stolen hers. And yet, somewhere deep beneath fear and anger, beneath pride and pain, something stirred, something dangerous. She looked away, her voice breaking as she whispered, "I don't understand you." He didn't move closer, didn't press. He only said, "Time." Her throat tightened. She wanted to scream at him, to curse his calm, his certainty, but no sound came. Instead, she turned and walked back toward the camp, her steps shaky, her heart heavier than ever. Behind her, she could feel his gaze burning into her back, not as her captor, not as her enemy, something else, something far worse.